Welcome to The Yoga Voice, a podcast by CITYOGA, School of Yoga and Health. Our guests discuss how the contemporary practice of this ancient art transforms the lives of individuals and communities in the Midwest and beyond. CITYOGA has been a center for the practice of yoga and yoga teacher training since opening in 2002. Join us as we explore how yoga inspires and transforms.
Good afternoon. Welcome all for tuning in today. Dave Sims here at The Yoga Voice. We are at CITYOGA in Indianapolis, Indiana. I will be your host today in our discussion with international yoga teacher, longtime guest teacher at CITYOGA, founder of Omstars Yoga TV, author of several books, inspirational speaker, Kino MacGregor. Kino is visiting us from Miami, Florida, where her and her husband, Tim, founded the Miami Life Center 12 years ago. This is where they teach regular classes and invite teachers to come in and do workshops and various teachings around yoga and meditation. Kino has a very deep understanding of yoga, of the philosophies of the Yoga Sutras, more nuanced teachings. And when she delivers a teaching, it's truly inspirational. So let's welcome Kino MacGregor. Thank you so much for coming here today.
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. It's a real honor to be the first guest. And hi to everyone who's listening. I love this practice, and I love the way that it connects me with people and with sort of fellow yogis. I think the thing that inspires me the most is seeing the way that the practice can open up what Aldous Huxley called the doors of perception, the way that the practice can shift your worldview just enough so that you can begin to question kind of the status quo assumptions and expand your ideas of who you can be and who the world can be, and can open you up to kind of a new way of being that is more from the heart and less from the head, more from the spirit and less from, the material paradigm. And that always really, really inspires me, because I feel like even one moment of inspiration, one moment where the crack gets opened and you taste or even get like a hint or a whiff of the eternal, I feel like that can change your whole life. And it's almost like, even if you never experience it again, to be there in that moment as the teacher in a shared space, to be there in that moment as a student and have some sort of a life-changing realization is a holy experience, is a sacred experience. And those moments are so inspirational. They're kind of the tool that I go back to, the foundation that I go back to, that I seek for in my own personal practice, and that I hope to share as a teacher.
So beautifully put. And I like how you talk about that experience from the perspective of a teacher and of a student. And that's why, part of why we love having you here, is because you have that, I'm growing, I'm changing, I'm evolving, I'm going to share it. And it's so important in our community to have that. I would like to hear a little bit about what you were like prior to yoga, and what happened, and what you were like, and what your life is like today.
Well, before I started yoga, I was definitely a little bit lost. I would say that I had perhaps a slightly above average level of misery. And, I was lost in the world. I was partying a lot, and I think I was kind of self-medicating depression, undiagnosed depression, with high amounts of, illegal chemical substances. And I was very much lost in that world, and, it was really when I was 19 years old, I walked into a yoga class. And although I didn't start a deeply committed practice after that, it left a seed inside of me, that kind of crack that opened me up to the idea that this is a real path of healing. So then when I was 22 years old and I'd kind of reached the absolute end of material pleasure, I'd reached the point where I really found out that permanent happiness doesn't lie in the perfect house music beat. I'm never going to find it. That next high is never going to be good enough, because there'll always be a come down. And I wanted to find out, you know, a way to live a more peaceful life in a sustainable manner. And I wanted to find out, you know, how I could do that. And so I decided to come to an Ashtanga yoga class. Now, I didn't research it. I was just drawn to it. So then I popped into a primary series class, and at the end of the primary series class, I'd felt this shift. Like I'd felt something happen during that class. And although I was quite terrible at all the postures, you know, I remember lying there at the end and I felt this sense of peace, this sense of kind of wholeness in my body that I hadn't felt before. And I just knew I wanted to keep practicing. So it was really from that moment that I committed myself to the practice. Within a year of taking that first class, I went to India, and I've been continuing to make almost annual trips to India for the last 20 years to continue my students' journey. I've begun, shortly thereafter, I began a meditation practice. I joined the Vipassana meditation course, and I've been sitting and having a sitting practice for about 18 years. And so that's very much a part of my spiritual journey as well. And I can look back now and I can see that the person that I was, that there, you know, more than anything, that there was nothing wrong with me. You know, I remember having this feeling like, you know, I needed to improve myself, that I needed to be different than I was, that I needed to achieve more. I needed to either be a different shape. I needed to lose some weight, or I needed to be a little bit taller. That I remember feeling like if only, you know, I didn't have as many zits as I did, or if only I, you know, had a better college degree, or if only I was a little like there was this feeling of wanting to be other than who I was.
Right.
And I feel like, and I feel like I can look back and I can see that there was nothing wrong with me. You know, that there was this kind of spark of divinity in myself even then. And I think that the biggest shift is that I feel very much at home with who I am now. Whereas the person that I was in a state of kind of self-rejection, self-denial, and I would vacillate between kind of self-diminishment and self-aggrandizement, and kind of this vacillating between protection of the ego and then annihilation of self, you know, or self-immolation or something like that. And now I feel very much whole. And at the same time, I look back and I can see that I'm not different. There's not, you know, that there are things that have changed, but I, you know, if I could look back and see the change, I would say that I'm more myself now, and that self was always there then. I just wasn't able to make peace with it. I wasn't able to have my heart be big enough to include all those disparate parts of myself. And that now, maybe more than ever, I feel a sense of resolution, a sense of I amness that carries through into a quality of being, a quality of presence that moment to moment is really joyful.
That's beautiful. So I like the way you put having a heart expanding and being big enough to contain all those things that, you know, are you know, our darker sides, or our things we're working on in our character and our, when you were speaking last night about the Yoga Sutras and this opportunity to transform and peek behind the veil and look at a true self that you just described so beautifully, I wonder, one thing came to mind, and I'll put this in the form of a question of how you deal with it today. There's something I read in 12-step literature that talks about, it's a paraphrase, but when we have to choose between character and comfort, character gets lost in the dust of our chase after what we think is happiness or success. You've had this great success, and I'm sure you've been striving to be happy. How has that shown up in your life when you have these moments of, you know, comfort or self-development, and making that choice to be true to yourself with that open, enlarged heart space?
Well, I think that particularly in the United States, we very much operate from this paradigm of gain and loss. we operate from, that everything is measured by what we've gotten out of something or what we've lost. And so it's sort of like we bring that into the yoga practice. When I first started, I definitely operated within that paradigm. I'm getting this pose, so then I feel like I'm worth something. Oh, I don't have my handstand press up, so then I feel like I'm not worth something. And so we operate in this gain and loss. I'm getting my forward bend, I'm losing my back bend. And so, and then you also feel like there's a zero-sum equation. And this is something that permeates our culture very much, where we feel like there's only a limited amount of success to go around. There's a scarcity mentality, so that we operate in this paradigm, and it creates this kind of panic, mad rush to achieve more, as though through achievement we'll somehow prove our worth. But it comes very much from, a space of unworthiness, a space of believing that we have to do all these worldly things in order to prove that we're worthy of love, of being valued, of being whole, when in fact the opposite is true. It's nothing in the material world can make us whole. Nothing in the material world can ever validate the inherent quality of being. So the idea of pursuing things in the material plane, achievements, whether those achievements are yoga poses or more numbers in your bank account or ticking things off the boxes of good personhood, checking off all those boxes. I donated to charity, I donated my time, I helped a stray dog, I rescued an orphan, or whether it's, I graduated top of my class, or whether it's I do, 5 hours of, yoga and handstand practice every day, or I study the Gita for, 10 hours a day or something. Like, we check off all these boxes. And if we're operating from the paradigm of scarcity, we're operating from the paradigm of gain and loss, it's all an effort to prove our worthiness. And I definitely started off with that in the practice. On days that I felt that I achieved something in the practice, I felt calm and happy. And on days that I felt that I didn't do so well in the asana realm, I felt sort of unhappy. And I don't know when a shift took place, but I kind of felt like the operating system in my mind got updated, and that entire paradigm changed, so that instead of operating from gain and loss, I operate from a place of wholeness, from a place of beingness that understands that, well, whatever I achieve is an emanation from that place. Whatever I do is an emanation from a place of wholeness, of resolution, of completeness, of peace. And then, well, everything is joyful then. Well, then, hey, if I fall out of a posture, I can laugh at it, because I know that doesn't mean that I'm unqualified to be a teacher, or I'm unqualified to be a yogi. And in the same way, that sort of feeling of wholeness can build resilience to face life's failures, because inevitably things happen. You work and you work, and as the Gita says, you have a right to work, but not a right to the fruits of your work or the results of your actions. So the idea of operating from a place of wholeness helps me anyway, weather the inevitable vicissitudes that come with operating in the material world, where sometimes you give your best and it wasn't good enough. You didn't achieve the results, but hey, that's okay, because you did your best, learn from it. And if the effort came from a place of wholeness, well, even the failure can be exhilarating, can be joyful, even the tragedy, even the pain, even the loss can be part of that sort of open-hearted feeling of wholeness. You can let it all in. Even the anger that comes up, you can let it all in, and it can be a part of the joy. It can be a part of the totality of beingness.
A little alchemy happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on that note, what would you like to share? Maybe a challenge or something that you've had to walk through, the vicissitudes of life that comes to mind that this applies?
Well, one of the challenges that I've kind of been working through lately has been anger. I think that as someone who works and lives very much in the yoga world, I think that anger is something that is misunderstood in the spiritual community. There are a lot of people that as soon as somebody is angry, they immediately are like, just breathe, calm down, all is good. Like, don't be so angry, don't be so negative, like good vibes only. And so there's kind of a very big rejection of anger. And I also feel that just with my own history, I've experienced some early childhood trauma. So I'm a trauma survivor. So I also have, like a trauma response to anger, which is that I didn't actually feel anger around the events around my early childhood for, I would say, 20 years after it happened. So I have a delayed response to my own anger. And that, combined with operating in a spiritual community that has a very kind of repressed or rejected relationship to anger, that was something that was really, really hard for for me to integrate into the notion of wholeness. And so what would end up happening for me was that immediately I noticed that if somebody else was angry, I was uncomfortable with their anger, and I would immediately take on the emotional labor of trying to process for them,
Yeah.
so that if someone was angry, I immediately was like, oh, well, what are you angry about? Like, how can we solve it? Like, I would treat it kind of like a problem to be solved, instead of just giving space for the person to feel what they feel.